Hello and welcome. We're here in PHA Media Building to meet the CEO of 1HQ. Stands for One Hard Question, in case you didn't know. It's Mark Artus. Hello, Mark.
Hello.
How are you?
Very good, thank you.
Good stuff. So 1HQ stands for One Hard Question.
Yep.
Briefly explain what that actually means.
Well, I think when we started the business, we were worried that so many companies go out there and try and say what their process is and how they're going to kind of do whatever the project's going to be. And we felt that we needed to go out there and sort of go and pose a problem and sort of pose a problem that was being proactive with whatever the needs of that particular client are going to be. And so we sort of came up with the idea. 1HQ was always our sister company, but it never meant anything. It's our postcode, actually. But we sort of decided to make 1HQ stand for One Hard Question because we felt that most of the people we went to see, they usually had a hard question. And I think the hard questions, and part of this book talks about hard questions that, it's not the hard questions, what's the square root of 28? It's more about what's the hard question that you know is going to change the way you potentially might do something or might potentially change the way your brand actually talks or communicates to people. And so one hard question was to try and say, what keeps you up at night?
Okay. So you talk about brands. I mean, we should probably explain that you are, how would you describe your agency? A branding agency?
Yeah, we're a brand agency.
And
yeah.
are you global or are you national?
No, we are an international design agency. We have an office in Durban which supports Unilever, but pretty much most of the work we work on is in pretty much every area of the world, although we only have offices in Windsor.
Yeah, and so what kind of clients do you have then? Do you have blue chip clients generally, or do you have smaller clients?
Yeah, we have a combination of all of those. We work for Unilever, we work for Nestle, we work for ABF. So yeah, we work on a lot of global branding issues, as well as a lot of more local brands to certainly to the UK.
Yeah. So obviously there's a big difference between someone like Nestle and a very small business. What do you think is the binding formula for a good brand then, and positioning yourself when you're starting out?
Well, interestingly, there's no difference. A brand's a brand. It doesn't matter whether you're Unilever or P&G or whether you're a startup round the corner with a sandwich shop. It's always a brand. And I think that, brands... I was reading an article this morning, kind of preparing for today, and there are so many articles today that talk about a brand being a logo. It just amazes me that people think the logo is the brand, and it's all like it just reflects the images of what it just is an image of what the brand is, or represents what the brand is. The brand itself is just so much more complex than that, and I think you need to think about a brand as it's all about the personality, and it's all about the tone of voice, the personality, the DNA of what you are and what you stand for, and the promises that the promises you want to give to people. The tone of voice is about how you then express that personality, because I do think that brands are Darwinian, and I think the process of branding is a Darwinian process, because it should change, or the tone of voice of it should change, but the actual personality or the DNA of it should never change. What you stand for, who you are, what your big idea is, and we talk about your value proposition. That value proposition is what people will buy, and so the brand reflects that.
Okay, and so let's imagine for a moment then that I am a guy with an idea of a business. I haven't done anything. What's the first thing you think I should do? Should I develop my brand or should I develop my product? Which is more important, do you think?
Well, I think you need to have a big idea.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you can't just create brands without a strong idea. I think you've got to have a strong idea on a product, a service, and have a strong belief that it will differentiate it in the marketplace. I think you've got to have a big idea. I think you've got to know what, I always say, you've got to know what you want, you've got to know where you're going. I think you've got to have an attitude of insurgence, and I think you also have to recognize a seminal moment. And I think all of those four things are not easy to combine all together, but you've got to have a big idea. Once you've got the big idea, and it's a powerful one, the branding part of it actually becomes relatively simple.
Yeah. And I know one of your philosophies is something to do with mind the gap, to do with right and left brain thinking, kind of lateral thinking and creative thinking. Explain a little bit about that concept and what you think.
Well, mind the gap is, if you look at it from our perspective or the branding world, I've always found that and I've worked in this business for 20 years, you have a strategic part of the business, you have a creative part of the business, and very frequently, or there's very few occasions where they actually overlap. And I kind of pinch myself when I say that because it just seems so obvious. But it's very difficult to do. And so you do get strategic teams that will come up with a strategic solution or an idea, and then they'll hand it over to you, and then you are then given it, and they're going, okay, well, great. What do we do with this? There was a great advert on TV, I can't remember who it was, with Accenture or one of them, where the advert was the guys gave a great big strategic presentation, and then as they walked out, it was like, can you believe it? They asked us what we're now going to do with it. And so strategy is sort of only takes you to a point. Creativity is then what will then bring that strategic idea alive. And to make that happen, you've got to have those clever people that can join that up. Creative planners usually that can actually write the brief around, okay, here's a strategic idea. This is what we think we're trying to solve. This is the creative brief. The creative brief is there for the client to understand what it is that strategy means. And more importantly, or as importantly, it's then for the creatives to understand what the brief is that the strategic side has got them to. And so the idea of that overlapping or minding that gap is to make sure that you get that seamless journey from strategy through to creativity, or else creative guys aren't exactly the most commercial guys in the world, and strategy aren't actually always the most creative guys in the world. And so those two things have to work in hand in hand.
So there are a lot of facets and arms to a brand.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people working behind major brands.
Yeah.
Do you think it must be difficult for an entrepreneur or someone just starting out to really consider all of those facets and have all that ability creatively and strategically?
Sure, that's why there are agencies like us.
Yeah, exactly. So it sort of brings us on neatly to your book, One Hard Question. What's it about? I mean, is it just kind of what you were just talking about, branding, or what's in it?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I have a fascination with history, and this book sort of is an easy read to look at some of the hard questions that have defined the world of branding. And it's sort of, and again, it's not referring to brands as we might think. I mean, there are companies that have obviously services and products, but religions are also a brand. And it talks about, and armies are brands. And what that talks about are some of the hard decisions that were made through history that sort of defined the way that either branding went, or it certainly defined history. Some of it talks about religion, Henry VIII, why did he get divorced? What was the point of that? And the consequences of him being divorced at the end of the day was defined history, and the hard question about him saying, well, shall I get divorced or not, and will it allow me to do these things? It was a defining moment in history. So that was the hard question we're talking about. It also talks about hard questions around with, I think it talks in there of BP, some of the questions they posed for themselves. It talks about Singapore, the battles of Singapore, whether the gun should have been facing out to sea or inland, and had the question been asked, well, which one do you think it should be? They sort of made the wrong decision, or as that points out, maybe they did make it, but they didn't make it loud enough. So it's talking about those hard decisions that we're facing today. The coalition it's starting to demonstrate that there is a hard question there. David Cameron never asked, well, what happens if none of us get voted in? Because the consequences of a coalition was probably his worst nightmare, and Clegg's worst nightmare for that matter. And the same with the banks today. It talks about Lehman Brothers. The hard question there was, shall we let it go down or not? And I don't think they quite realised that the impact of that hard question caused the mess we're in right now. And if we let Greece go down, it will be 50 times worse than that. But again, it's those hard questions that nobody really wants to ask, because they know the consequences are just going to change the rules of the rules that we work towards.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think then is the big problem? I know it's well, like we discussed, the brand is multifaceted by nature, and it has many different arms and whatever. But what's the main thing people tend to get wrong, in your opinion?
Well, I don't think they have a good idea, and I don't think they differentiate themselves. I think that we're in an interesting time right now where we think it's all about, one of the areas I think we're indifferent about brands. I think there's a problem. I think that lots of brands are very, very good at what they do. I was with Marks and Spencer yesterday looking at their new cafe concept in Edgware Road. And the logistics to get all of that fruit and all of those sandwiches tasting as good as they taste, and being as fresh as they are onto the shelves logistically, you can't imagine how complex that is, and the algorithms they probably have to work to get it there. But when people go in there, they'll take one, or they'll say, well, I could also go to Costa, or I could also go to eat. And so, I think consumers are getting indifferent about brands and about experiences and about services because a lot of them are very, very good. And so I think we're getting into a period right now where indifference is the virus. And I think it's absolutely critical that brands are how do they make their brand special? What is that value? Again, value proposition sort of sounds such a bit cheesy, but it's absolutely right. What is that value proposition? And what's going to differentiate and make my brand special in this world? Apple have done it. Apple, everybody cites Apple, but Apple have absolutely done it. They've made people love their brands. And we talk about those brands as absorptive brands, where we want to absorb it into our lifestyle. Harley Davidson was another absorptive brand where people wanted to tattoo themselves because they wanted to live the Harley Davidson experience. And if you think about it, Harley Davidson should have failed many times over by the likes of Suzuki and Yamaha. But at the end of the day, people like the fact that the bikes, or they put up with the fact that it broke down. They put up with the fact that it was uncomfortable. They put up with the fact that it vibrated a lot because they loved the brand and everything that it represented. And I don't think there are enough brands like that out there. But with the work we're doing and the work we're starting to see, I think there are going to be some pretty interesting developments with some of the bigger brands over the next 5 to 6 months, because I think they're going to have to.
Okay. So a big tip then for anyone watching to take away would be work hard with your brand to differentiate it from everything else and make people love it.
Yeah, that's it. You've got to have a big idea. Yeah. You've got to have that big idea, but you have got to be, as I said, insurgent. And you have to be seminal too. You've got to combine those things, because recognizing an opportunity is bloody difficult. And how do you? And then once you've recognized it, how do you go about actually putting a team together to solve it? It's a big deal. But I think branding is pretty strong today. But the consumer is getting indifferent. So all the more reason why brands have got to have a big idea that stands out and is relevant.
Totally agree. Well, take that in, read the book, and make your brand a world beater. Thank you very much for joining us.
Cool. Thank you.